Hello, performance management students. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. And a very warm welcome to this InFocus webinar for the September 2025 exams. My name is Martin, and I work as Education Support Manager here at ACCA. And this session today is titled Examiner's Report Unlocked, and it will provide an in-depth exploration of the latest March-June 25 examiners reports and uncover strategies to support your exam performance. Now, I'm joined on this session by expert tutor Moniza Siddiqui, who will deliver this session and help us explore common pitfalls as well as share some essential technical points, and she will demonstrate with some examples as well. Now, during this session, Moniza will also guide on how to effectively use the available exam practice resources, such as marking guides and sample answers, and how to present your exam responses clearly and confidently. We'll also cover some of the live sessions that you will have asked in the course of the webinar, so please do put those in bright and early via the Q&A section. Now, before I hand over to Moniza, I'd like to briefly run through a few housekeeping items. Now, there are some buttons on your screen that will be useful to you in this session. You will find a help icon for quick access to information that can assist you with any technical issues during the session. Please make sure that both the slide and the media player icons are selected, because the content will show on those two windows in the course of the webinar. You can use the chat function to engage with fellow participants, but please note that that's a public forum, so please do not share any personal information in the chat. Now, also look out for the icon that resembles a file, because clicking on that will give you access to helpful materials related to today's webinar, including a PDF version of the slides and links to, the direct links that we will refer to in this session. Feel free to move things around your screen, resize the windows as you like. And in case you can't hear us or see the visuals at any point, please try refreshing your browser, and that should help. In case you have any technical challenges, don't worry much, because you'll receive an email tomorrow with details on how to access the recording. So not need for much worrying on that, but please take advantage of this live session so you can ask your questions and get the information firsthand. So I'm going to hand over to Moniza in a moment, and I'll be back with you towards the end of the session. And just to remind you that if you'd like to ask a question for us to respond, please do that through the Q&A section. We'll try our very best to answer as many questions as we possibly can within the 1 hour that we have. So without much more ado, I want to hand over now to Moniza. Moniza?
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it. Hello and welcome everyone to the PM InFocus webinar, where, as Martin has highlighted, I've been asked to provide you key reminders as well as additional guidance for your September 2025 exam attempt. So we'll basically be focusing on the examiner's report, which includes observations from the March and June 2025 exam sittings. So those of you who are preparing for the September 25 attempt will be able to pick up some key pointers from the feedback of the observation that the examination team has gathered from the answer scripts of the past two exam sittings, and you can actually use that to improve your performance for your live exam. So a quick introduction of myself. I am Moniza Siddiqui. I am an FCCA and I hold the MSc in Professional Accountancy qualification from University of London. And I have 20 plus years of experience in the ACC education sector. Currently, I'm heading the Foundation Diploma qualification at a Platinum ALP. So our agenda for today, the things that we'll be covering from the session today, is going to be highly geared session, so you need to keep up with me, is we'll be looking at the key insights from the examiner's report. We will be having a quick look at the practice platform and see how you can utilize that effectively in your preparation. We will be having another quick look at any syllabus changes. And before I wrap up with the effective exam strategies, we will, just focus on any technical points that we need to focus on, eating words, so that we need to focus on in order to improve our performance for September. And we'll wrap up with the live Q&A, as Martin has highlighted, but you do not need to wait till the end of the session to actually get your questions across, right? You've got the Q&A, just slot in your questions as they occur to you, and we will, of course, I will try my best to cover as many questions as I can towards the end of the session. So, as I mentioned, we've got a highly geared session. Let's start with the key insights from the examiner's report. And here we'll be looking at the common challenges or the issues that the students or the learners faced, and certain technical points that the examination team has sort of thought worthy to share with you. So, one thing that I would like to highlight is that the examiner's report in itself is actually a good reference material for those of you who are preparing for the exams, in the upcoming sessions. So, at any point in time, once you're done with your knowledge aspect, once you're done with your practice, it's always good to pick up the examiner's report, because it's all available on the ACCA website, and go through the comments of the examiner, because they have these reports pretty much for every cohort. So combined cohorts, as we have now for the March and June attempt, but we have these reports, and we've got multiple reports available. And what these reports provide is not just insights on where candidates normally tend to go wrong, and therefore provide you, with alerts as to what to avoid, but they also provide you with practice material, because they do refer to questions, that section A questions, section B questions, and section C questions, that becomes additional practice material for you. So it's always a good practice to sort of incorporate going through examiners reports on your own as you're preparing for the exam. Okay, so now for this particular examiner's report that we're referring to, which is the March and June 25 report, we'll of course be looking at the feedback for each section. So for section A, just a reminder, you know that you will be appearing, or you'll be attempting, 15 objective type questions, which will be worth 2 marks each. And because these 15 objective type questions can cover any syllabus area, the most important reminder that the examination team gives us is do not question spot. Do not try and be selective about the topics or the concepts that you study. So it's a natural tendency to actually keep on referring, or keep on going back to practice those questions that you are comfortable with. But what is very important is that because this exam will cover any concept that's part of the syllabus, you need to make sure that you have fully covered all the knowledge aspects. Okay. Now, in the exam, another key reminder that you need to take account of is the time management, right? Because if once you let go of the time, things can go downhill pretty fast. So what is very important is that at this point in time, when you're practicing questions, you need to time yourself so that when you go into the live exam, you're able to keep a tab on the time management. And what we normally recommend for section A, for the 15 questions that you're attempting in section A, is that you should try and wrap it up within 54 minutes. Now, once the 54 minutes are up, strongly recommended, move on to the next section, right? Don't take up too much of your very valuable time trying to attempt questions that you're clearly probably struggling with. You can always flag them. You've got that option, that feature is available. Just flag those questions and you can come back to them at a later stage. But what's ideal is once the 54 minutes are up, and if it is indeed the sequence that you're following, that you started with section A, then you should move on to section B. All right. And of course, when we come to section B, I will share the relevant pointers there. Now, in the examiner's report that we are covering, the examination team has highlighted 4 most challenging objective type questions. So they've highlighted 4 questions. Given the fact that we've got a limited amount of time, we will not be going through all 4 of them. But what I have done is I've picked up some of the key pointers from these particular feedback points, and I will be referring as to how those pointers would have been applicable or would have been an effective exam strategy for that particular question. So for example, if I move on to the next slide, here we go. The first reminder of the first, preparation point that you need to keep in mind is that you need to know your formulas. So in performance management, you do have formulas that will be asked, right? You'll have to calculate, for example, residual income, which is going to be the example that we're going to see. And you need to be absolutely certain of the formula, because what happens is that in the objective type questions, there are red herrings. So by red herrings, I mean there are distractors. There is information that could be misleading. Case in point, this is one of the OTQ that the examination team has highlighted that the students or the learners who appeared for these exams found challenging, so they did not perform well in this particular question. Now, you can, of course, go through it in detail because it's part of the examiner's report. I'm just going to summarize it for you. So the requirement was that we had to calculate the residual income for a particular division of a company. Right now, as soon as you read the requirement, you should immediately be thinking, okay, residual income, what's the formula? And the formula is your operating profit less the imputed interest, which is, of course, the cost of capital applied to the capital employed. Now, you need to be absolutely certain of this formula because as you go through the information that's available on screen, especially if you look at the table, right, we've got the pre-tax operating profit, which, as I've highlighted in blue, is relevant for us to arrive at the correct answer. But what did throw certain candidates off was the fact that they also provided you with information regarding tax. And so some of the candidates decided that we do need to deduct tax and then use the final profit figure for the calculation of the residual income, which was, of course, wrong. Okay. Then we have the average capital employed, again highlighted in blue. So that's 19,800. It's visible there. This was, of course, relevant piece of information to arrive at the correct answer. But if you look at the line immediately below the table, they highlighted, the examination team mentioned that 11,700 of this related to non-current assets. Now, this is a red herring. Right? This does not have any impact on your actual calculation because we always use the average capital employed, since that is already available, 19,800, and we have no reason to exclude the balancing amount. We will still stick to 19,800 for our calculation. Finally, the third red herring in this particular example was that you had been given two different cost of capital percentages. You had been given one for the company and one for the division. Now, the rule here is simple. Since you're calculating the residual income for the division, it makes sense that you should use the cost of capital that is relevant to the division, and that would be 9%. So what is important again is that you need to know your formulas so that you are able to overcome the challenges which are thrown your way by the examination team. And of course, it's purely because they want you to be confident in your concepts. Okay, so this was one of the key examples. The other, which is a very effective technique, is that you should be able to use hypothetical figures or assumed figures to prove or disprove statements. Again, jumping right into the example, this was one of the OTQs that students found challenging. Now, again, just summarizing, we have been informed that there's a company that is thinking of introducing the cost volume profit analysis concept in their organization. We have been given no numbers, no further information. All we have is three statements. So it's a hot areas question. And what we have to do is we have to identify whether each of the statements are true or false. Now, if you simply focus on the first statement, it states that we have that increasing fixed costs by 12% will increase the break-even point by more than 12%. Now, we need to identify whether the statement is true or false. And now, you're spending time, you're thinking, does this make sense? Now, those of you who are absolutely certain about your CVP concepts might be immediately able to pick up that this would be a false statement. But candidates like me might struggle. Now, in this situation, rather than, going for a guess, what is ideal is just use assumed figures. So if you look at the table, the second bullet point, right, this is my assumed figures. So I start off by thinking, all right, if I assume that fixed cost is $10,000 and my contribution per unit is $10, the break-even point works out to be 1,000 units. Now, if the fixed cost were to increase by 12%, making it $11,200, and there is, of course, no change in the contribution per unit because unless you're told otherwise, the variable elements per unit should remain constant. Then my break-even point calculates to be 1120 units. And when I convert this into a percentage, this turns out to be exactly a 12% increase, right? So if I go back to the statement says increasing fixed cost by 12% will increase the break-even point by more than 12%. Now, if it was by 12%, absolutely the statement would have been true. But because the statement said by more than 12%, and we've just proven that is not the case, this statement is false. So what is important is the technique that when you're stuck with these statements, rather than just trying to go for a guess, as I've mentioned before, use assumed figures, use hypothetical figures, and just work your way around it. Moving on to section B. Now, in section B, you will, of course, come across 3 objective type cases, and each case will be covering a particular syllabus area. And for each case, you will have 5 independent questions. And normally, a single concept is tested in that question, and they're independent. So that means even if you get the answer to the first question wrong, the rest of the answers will not get affected. And these questions are a mixed bag. And by that, I mean that there will be numerical as well as narrative questions. So there'll be, calculation based, and there will be discursive elements in these 5 questions. Again, because you are attempting a total of 15 questions, right? So that's 15 questions in total. So the recommended time allocation for section B is 54 minutes. All right. Now, but because we're dealing with a particular case, what you could do when you're carrying out your practice as of now is set a timer for 18 minutes per case, because that's how it works out, 1.8 minute per mark. So you've got 10 marks per case. 18 minutes is more than enough. So in total, you should be wrapping up your section B ideally in 54 minutes. And as I've mentioned before, in the live exam, once the 54 minutes are up, stop, move on to the next section, right? You can always flag the questions that you've not attempted and come back to them at a later time. Okay, now the examiner's report, once again, is a good source material because each examiner's report covers at least one complete objective type case. So you can get more practice material if you refer to the examiner's reports of the past. Okay, so starting with or looking at the question that we had in this particular examiner's report, we've got a company, it's making 3 different type of chairs. So for ease of reference, I'm calling them C, L, and S. Of chair C is really well. There are questions about continuing the production for chair L and S. Further information in the case outlines that there's an offer for outsourcing the production of all 3 chairs possibly. We've also got a bulk order for chair C, but there are certain resource limitations. And we've got a special order for S, chair S, but we have thought about how to price it effectively. So all in all, this question related to the decision making techniques, right? So the relevant costing analysis concept is being examined in this particular case. So of course, you have to take out some time to actually go through the scenario itself. But one other thing that you need to keep in mind is that normally the way the information is laid out in the scenario, that's pretty much how the questions are set out. So again, we'll not be looking at all 5 questions, right? But I'm going to pick up some key questions. So the first one, if you just read the requirement, based only on the recent results provided, which, if any, of the chairs should Hurstmid Company cease to produce? So as I mentioned, there are 3 chairs that are being made, right? And out of that, chair C is performing well. So if you look at the answer options available, the 4 options that we do not have any mention of chair C. We have Leggero and we have Serenito, which is chair L and S. And that's it. So we're just thinking, which of these 2 or both or neither should we cease to manufacture? Now, the key point over here for this particular question is that when you refer to the relevant information in the scenario, it's very easy, it's very tempting to go for the most obvious answer, the apparent information. So if you refer to the table that's visible on this, that should be visible to you on the screen right now, we've got the performance of the 3 different chairs. So we've got Comforo, we've got Leggero, we've got Serenito. And if you look at the absolute final line, which is the profit or loss, we see that C is generating a profit of 500, L is generating a loss of 800, and S is generating a loss of 500. So it's very easy to just pick up that information and immediately go back and say, right, we should discontinue making both L and S. Remember, the questions are not always going to be that straightforward. They're not always going to be tricky, but the concept that's being tested over here is decision making. And decision making is always dependent upon relevant information. So the relevant information that we now need to focus on in this table are the rows that I've highlighted, which would be contribution and the attributable fixed cost. So if you focus on the contribution, because that is key information for decision making, right? We see that all 3 chairs are actually giving us a positive contribution. So 2,700, 800, 500, which is of course absolutely brilliant. But then if we consider the fixed costs, now normally fixed costs are ignored. So they're considered to be irrelevant because they're going to take place regardless of whether the product is made or not, etc., etc. However, when we look at attributable fixed costs, now these are fixed costs that are specifically or directly related to this product. So if I were to, for example, cease making Comforo, the chair C, then technically my company would not be incurring the $1,000 attributable fixed cost that relates to that particular product. Right, so this attributable fixed cost becomes relevant for the decision making. And so what's important right now is for me to look at whether we are in a positive, or whether we're in the green or in the red, after our contribution has accounted for the attributable fixed cost. So if you look at the chair C, the contribution is 2,700, attributable fixed cost is just 1,000. So even after accounting for that, we're still in a profitable position. Brilliant. If you look at chair L, contribution is 800, but the attributable fixed cost is 900. So that's where we immediately go into a loss making position, right? And if you look at chair S, 500 is the contribution, but the attributable fixed cost is just 400. So even after accounting for the attributable fixed cost, we are in a positive place. So out of the three chairs, what we should ideally stop making is the first, that is leisure only. So the important point to note over here is that do not always go for the obvious answer. Stop, pause, think. What is the concept that is being tested? Apply that concept to the scenario. And if you do end up coming back to the same answer, that both L and S should not be produced, by all means, that should be the answer that you select. Right? But you don't be tempted to just select the most obvious answer immediately. Coming to the next question from the case, based on the quotation from Hamper Company, which of the chairs should continue to be manufactured internally? So again, here, what we are trying to highlight is the fact that you need to work out the relevant piece of information in order to arrive at the answer. So this would have required a bit of working. And I know that with OTQs, normally candidates, tend to shy away from workings because they just want to get to the right answer, or they're happy, carrying out the working on the calculator and that's it. But remember, you've got the Scratchpad facility, and that's there for questions such as these. Because in this particular question, what happens is that from the scenario, you actually have to carry out this comparison. So this comparison is not part of the scenario. You have to pull this out. You have to carry out this working on your own to arrive at the correct answer. And so because we've been asked to identify which of the chairs we should continue to make internally as opposed to outsourcing it, the relevant comparison should be how much does it cost when we make that chair internally, and how much does it cost if we were to outsource the production of that particular product. All right. And when you compare the two, wherever it's cheaper for you to make the product internally, of course that's the decision that you're going to go for. So if you again look at just the attributable fixed cost, which is the second, well, technically it's the fourth row in the table, and if we compare it with the purchase cost, which is the outsourcing cost, so I don't really need to even work out the saving or the net cost, etc. I can simply compare the two and see that Comforo, in total, I need to look at the variable and the attributable fixed cost. So the two combined together will give me 2,800. Whereas if I were to outsource it, it would only cost me 2,100. So I should definitely outsource Comforo. For Leisure, 900 and 900, that means a total of 1,800. But if I were to outsource it, it would only cost me 700. So I should definitely outsource it. And then we come to Serenito, and we realize that 700 plus 400, so it's going to cost me lesser, because that's just 1,100. It's going to cost me lesser if I were to make Serenito in-house rather than when I purchase it from a third party, because that would cost me 1,200. So the answer here would be that I should continue to make Serenito in-house rather than outsourcing it. Okay, so section B, really, it's just about being confident in your knowledge and making sure that you apply it accurately. Okay. Moving on to the next section, section C, right? So this is the final section. You will have two constructive response questions worth 20 marks each. And I know, this is one of the questions that candidates often ask, what syllabus area will be tested? Now with section E, we do have some definite guidance. So for section A, section B, any area of the syllabus. So reminder, do not try and pick and choose or be selective about the topics that you're studying, because you do need to attempt section A and section B as well. But when it comes to section C, what we've been definitely told by the examination team is that you'll always have one question from syllabus area E, which if you look at the capability diagram extract on the slide here, that relates to performance measurement and control. All right. And then you'll have one question worth 20 marks from either syllabus area C, which is decision making techniques, or syllabus area D, which is budgeting and control. Okay. Now, the recommended time for this section, because you're attempting a total of 40 marks, is 72 minutes. And ideally, you should be spending around 36 minutes each question. So again, the reason why I've included this information on the slides today is because this is supposed to be your guideline when you're practicing your questions right now. Okay, you need to start implementing this right now in order for you to be comfortable with this time availability in the live exam. Okay, now the examiner's report covers feedback on both the constructive response questions, and of course we've got the practice platform where you can access the detailed question, the sample answer, and the standard marking scheme, which I'll be referring to in just a short while. The key things that I want to pick up from the feedback that the examination team has highlighted, and I'll be going through this question by question. So the first question that we have is a not-for-profit organization. We've got the hospital trust, and we've got the requirements, and then we've got, of course, the pointers that the examination team has picked up. So what I've done is I've picked up the requirements and I've slotted that in the box. So if you just quickly read through the requirement, the first requirement that we had for the first question of section C, we were required to define economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, which are the three E's in a value for money context. Now, the requirement does not mention the hospital because this is a generic requirement. Okay. And if you look at the mark allocation, there are 3 marks allocated to this particular requirement, which means that the examination team has set aside 1 mark for each definition. Right? So this is just a test of knowledge because you just need to really define what economy, what efficiency, and what effectiveness is, which means you need to make sure that you've covered the value for money concept, of course, as part of the syllabus. Now, what is important is that the definition that scores the full mark was one that was complete as far as the examination team was concerned. Now, to give you an idea, and these are extracts from the examiner's report, if you look at the statement that has been highlighted in the block below, economy is minimizing cost. So this is one of the answer. This is, a sample answer that was provided by certain candidates. And unfortunately, this did not score any marks. Right. In order to score the mark, and this is an easy mark, you need to know the definitions, right? And you need to provide that in a complete statement. So the correct answer that would have scored you the mark is the first line, which is economy can be defined as the extent to which services of an acceptable quantity and quality are provided at the lowest cost possible. I'm going to pause here and highlight one thing. This, of course, now there are certain technical definitions which you can just learn and apply as is, but there are certain definitions that you have margin with, so you can actually come up with a slightly different wording, and that would be absolutely fine. The key is that you can't just say economy is about minimizing cost and expect to get the full mark. Right? What is important is that you're able to give some more context to that definition in order to score the mark. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because a lot of candidates tend to come back and say, well, when I compare my answer or my wordings to that of the standard solution, there's a difference, and there's a huge difference, and that's absolutely fine. As long as the statement that you're providing is complete, it's making sense, it's relevant, of course, right? You would get the mark. So you don't have to use the exact same wordings as the sample answer, especially true for the analysis aspect, right? Of course, with definitions, as I've mentioned, there are certain definitions that you just can't get just can't work around. You need to stick to those wordings. But the important thing is that you provide a complete statement if you want to score a full mark. That's the key point. Moving on, the next requirement, worth 4 marks, asks us to explain why it is important that the Eastern Hospital Trust uses a balanced mix of performance measures across the 3 E's. Right, there were 4 marks for this, so we had to make at least 4 relevant points. Now, what is important here from the examiner's feedback is that candidates tended to just focus, just provide the answer that they wanted to provide rather than focusing on answering the requirement. And the requirement was, we have to look at why the organization needed to use a balanced mix. That was the key point. Okay. And we needed to make sure that we were using information from the scenario, because the requirement very clearly is now asking why this particular organization needs to follow this particular approach. And so the examiner's feedback was that a lot of candidates did not answer the requirement, so they ended up justifying that yes, they should have economy, they should have efficiency, and they should have effectiveness, but they weren't really applying the answer, they weren't really picking up the information from the scenario and applying it. Okay. Also, again, a natural tendency, if you're comfortable with one concept, which is economy, for example, because we are a number of people, majority of the times, right? So a lot of people wrote a lot for the economy subheading, but they did not actually provide sufficient points for efficiency and effectiveness. And that was important, because when you look at the marking guide, it sort of goes for an equal split between all three headings. So that's important. You need to plan your answer, not just so that you're focusing on one area that you're most comfortable with. You need to make sure that you're picking up the relevant information from the scenario and you're answering the requirement. And one of the feedback points that we'll be covering later on as well is use of subheadings makes things easier. Okay. But we'll be coming back to that later. Moving on, the next requirement we had for 9 marks was to discuss the performance of the three hospitals using the performance data provided. And after the requirement, we had a note which said, use the headings economy, efficiency, and effectiveness to structure your answer. So this is a good segue to to the point that I was making previously, that if you've been given an additional instruction, which you clearly have in this particular case, the examination team said, when you start your answer, give a subheading economy, give a subheading efficiency, give a subheading effectiveness, and then discuss a performance measure for each of the subheading. All right. And again, we didn't need to use information from the scenario, because we were talking very specifically about the hospitals. And what we needed to make sure was that when we talk about performance measures, there are certain performance measures that could actually work across the categories. What you need to remember is that you would get mark the first time that you were to highlight a particular performance measure. But if you keep on repeating the same points, the examination team is going to be hard pressed to award you any additional marks. And that's exactly what the examiner's report extract says. The first thing that they've highlighted is that examiners who did not use these headings when planning their answer missed out on marks. And that's again because when you're in the flow, when you're writing the response, you tend to just, write whatever comes to to your mind first. But when you have sort of laid out your structure and you said, I need to write something for economy, I need to write something for efficiency, I need to write something for effectiveness, you will go back and think, hold on, have I written sufficient points for, efficiency, for example? So using the subheadings or not using them in this particular case led to poor performance by the candidates. Then, as I mentioned before, that credit is normally only given for per point that is made once. If you keep on rehashing the same thing in different wordings, you're not really going to be scoring any marks. So you need to be conscious of that as well. Okay. And because this was about discussing, and the verbs are very, very important, the candidates who simply did not mention, oh, this is good or this is bad, but really focused on, whether there was improvement or not, since this was a comparison between three different hospitals, they were able to score a lot more marks than candidates who simply said, oh, so they're economical, this is good. This company is not effective, this is bad. So because it was supposed to be a comparison, you sort of also had to step back, look at the big picture and say, in comparison to this hospital, this particular hospital is performing well in this area, which is perhaps economy, effectiveness, or efficiency. Okay. Moving on, the next question that we had in this particular exam attempt, or in these two exam sittings, related to activity-based budgeting. So this is the next question, and this covers syllabus area D, which is budgeting and control. And the first requirement was worth 14 marks. That's a lot of marks, right? And we had been asked to use the template provided, which, as you can see, I have, given you the extract. The template is provided to you. We had to use this template, and we had to complete the activity-based budget for overheads for the quality tire company for the year ended 31st December, etc. Now, all you really need to do is know your concepts and fill out the template. And what is very important in such question where you're using numbers is to show your workings. And because this is a common challenge that I face when I'm marking scripts, candidates tend to carry out the working on their calculator, slot in the final answer, and they think they're going to score the full mark. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, there are two things. When you look at the marking guide, there are marks allotted to specific workings. Secondly, if you have gotten the final answer wrong, by not showing the workings, you're not leaving any margin for the marking team to give you or award you any marks. All right. So showing workings is very, very, very important. Now, when it comes to the workings, of course, we'll be talking about, and this is the feedback from the examination team, that when you show your workings, of course, even if you've gotten some part of it wrong, you could still get the mark if the examination team, if the marker feels that you are applying the correct methodology. Right. So again, if you haven't shown the working, you're not giving them any margin to give you these kind of marks in spite of any errors made. Second, when you are using the spreadsheet formulas, just use those formulas for when you're going for simple working. So for example, when you're trying to work out the total of a column, just use the sum formula. But when the working is complicated, so for example, you've got to increase the revenue as well as the associated cost by a certain percentage for each quarter or each year, which is normally the case in budgeting scenarios, then instead of using the spreadsheet formulas and complicating that working and making errors in that which could potentially make you lose out on easy marks, what is more effective is for you to carry out a separate working. So for example, you could show a separate table and show the increase in the revenue, increase in the costs, so you could inflate those as per the percentage or the information provided in the scenario, and then use the spreadsheet formulas where it's just a simple working of addition, deduction, or multiplication, for example. All right, but don't try and show all your workings in a single formula, because if you make errors, you would be hard pressed to pick it up, and like I said, the marker would of course be hard pressed to give you any marks if you've gotten it wrong. Okay. All right. The next requirement that we had was explain three difficulties which could be faced by an organization when implementing an activity based budgeting system. Now again, read the wordings of the requirements. We have to identify three difficulties, okay? But it says faced by an organization. It's not specifically mentioning this organization that was in the scenario. So this is again a generic requirement. And I know those of you who've gone through this particular topic and immediately think of some of the challenges that the company would face in implementing any new budgeting system, or specifically the activity-based budgeting system. But what is also important is that you need to look at the mark allocation and realize that even though they're asking for just three difficulties, and the examination team will be marking in the first three difficulties that you highlight, so you should always go for your stronger points first. What you need to focus on is the fact that there are 6 marks allocated to these three difficulties, which means there are 2 marks per difficulty. Right? So you need to make sure that when you present that difficulty, it's not just, oh, this is the challenge that the company would face. You have to flesh it out. You need to provide more context to it. So you do also need to focus on the verb, and the verb clearly said explain, and that is why there are 2 marks for each of the difficulties. Okay. Now, this is again an extract from the examiner's report where it says that answers to this part of the questions were weak, and that is because some kind of explanation was needed. And then if you look at the 3 bullet points that are included on the slide, these are some of the answers that the candidates provided. So ABB is costly, ABB is difficult, ABB is time consuming. Now, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of the marker, would you be able to give 2 marks to each of or any of these bullet points? And I believe that all of you would agree with me that the answer to that would be no. Right? And that's primarily because it's not even a complete statement. Don't go for bullets, use a complete statement, and that complete statement would actually just make you eligible for a single mark. So you need to explain it a bit more. So if when you say ABB is costly, which for general organizations could be difficult if they're working with a limited budget, etc. So try and flesh it out. If you need to refer to the information in the scenario, you can make use of it. So there's no penalty if you were to use information from the scenario to give context to your explanation. That would be absolutely fine. But the important thing is that you do need to flesh out your answer. Important. Now with this, what we've done is we've effectively looked at the feedback points from the examiner's report. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly share my screen and take you to the practice platform. Okay, so I am sharing the Chrome tab. Okay, let's just go for entire screen. Share. All right, so now if the screen share is visible, right, this is the practice platform. Now what you need to do is, and I'm sure majority of you have already gone through this, you need to self-assign yourself practice questions. So I'm going to go to the performance management paper. There is no variant, and I'm going to, so you have options. You can assign yourself past exam papers, specimen exams, practice exams, or the blank workspace. I'm just going to go for the past exam. And in the past exam, these are all the past exam questions that are now available to you on the practice platform. Okay. And since we are focusing on the examiner's report that relates to March-June 2025 exam attempt, I'm simply going to assign it to myself. Now, as soon as I've done that, I can go back to my assignments, and here we go. So I've assigned this particular set to myself 3 times, and that is because when I assign it to myself for the first time, I'm obviously able to start the exam. And once I've gone through the initial instructions, which I'm going to quickly run through once it's loaded, so for some reason there's an error. Okay, let me see if I can refresh that and get that sorted. No, for some reason it's just not allowing me to move beyond. That's fine. We don't want to waste our time here. What is important is that once you've attempted these CRQs, because these practice questions will provide you access to the long form questions that I've just sort of walked through. So you can attempt them in the exam platform, so you can improve your typing speed. You can make sure that you are comfortable with how you present your information. These are also important techniques. These are important exam strategies. So once you've done that, what you can do is that once you end your exam, you are in a position to mark your exam. And when you are in a position to mark your exam, what you will have available to you is the sample answer, the standard solution, and the marking guide. So because I had predicted that I could face this particular issue, right, I am going to come back to my slides and show you this is what you should be able to access when you start self-assessing. And this is very crucial, okay, because at this point in time, when the exams on Wednesday, 3rd of September, for majority of you, even for the remotely set up exams, you've got the time frame that you've got. Practice is crucial. So when you start practicing, apart from setting aside time for each question that you'll be attempting, what you then need to do is self-assess. And for that, you need to refer to the standard solution, look at the marking guide. So this is the sample marking guide for the first question. So they've got 3 marks for the 3 E's, you've got 4 marks for the explanation, you've got 9 marks for the discussion, and of course the challenges. And map your answer to the standard solution while keeping in mind that the standard solution is an ideal solution. So what is important is that even if your wordings are not exactly the same, and they couldn't be, right? No two persons should ideally be writing in the exact same manner. But what is important is that the generic point or the features of your answer should be able to match to the standard solution. So for example, requirement B, where you had to sort of highlight, the performance measures, you should be using subheadings just as the standard solution is highlighted. So there should be a subheading for economy, efficiency, etc. Similarly, whatever discussion you carry out, your discussion should end with a proper analysis or a discussion. Okay. If we were to move on to the next question, well, there's 14 marks for the activity-based budget, and there are 6 marks for the difficulties, okay? And so the sample answer and marking scheme, again, highlights the need for separate workings when the workings are lengthier. And again, it also highlights, that even when you are highlight or including the difficulty, so this is an answer where you had no further instructions except for the fact that you had to identify 3 different difficulties. What you could ideally do is use subheadings. So use a subheading that sort of it will orient you as well. It will give you direction. This is the point that I now need to sort of highlight on. Okay, so these are the sample answer and marking schemes that you should refer to once you've attempted the questions yourself. So self-assessment is crucial. Okay, now syllabus changes. I'm happy to say that as far as performance management is concerned, there are none. All right, so just a couple of changes which you can pick up from the summary of changes to any syllabus that's included in the syllabus and study guide. So for performance management, there are absolutely no changes except for some wordings that have changed. So nothing that you need to be too alarmed about, especially students who are studying on their own. This is a very key document that you do need to refer to. So every time for any exam, whenever you are preparing for a particular exam attempt, make sure that you refer to the relevant syllabus and study guide. But as I've mentioned, for performance management, we do not have any such challenges. Now, I'm going to quickly walk through certain effective exam strategies, the way forward, okay, because a lot of you have been looking at the questions, have been asking set about guidance about techniques, etc. First, for a learner such as yourself, align yourself. So think, what are the topics, what are the concepts that I find challenging? Try and go through them first and foremost. That's very important. Just get them out of the way, because as I've mentioned again and again, you cannot be selective about the topics or the concepts. So you can't say, right, I find this topic difficult, so just let it be. No, what if it's examined? So you do need to prepare it and get that out of the way first, so that the anxiety level or the stress level goes down. Learning advantages and disadvantages of different techniques is something that you could include in your preparation agenda, right? Because normally you can come across questions where you simply said, right, what is the advantage of this particular technique? Or as we just saw, what are the difficulties? Technically, that's the disadvantages of implementing an activity-based budgeting system. You need to practice objective type questions daily, right? There is no margin of error there. You need to make sure that you're practicing those questions daily. And because the three constructive response questions come from either syllabus area C, D, or E, you need to make sure that you've covered at least 2 to 3 practice questions, CRQs, from each of those syllabus areas. Self-assessment, I've already highlighted. And then, because that was one of the questions that I had picked up on, some of the pointers that I would like to highlight for CRQs, some of them are repetition. Know your templates, know your formulas. So make sure that you stick to the recommended templates for any computation for budgeting specifically, for example. Of course, it will be guided by the information that's available in the scenario. Whenever there's any working that is going to be a repeat working, so for example, you have to carry out a working for multiple years, think that tabular format. So rather than carrying out the working again and again, create a table so that you just need to mention the details once, and then you can carry out the working for each relevant period or quarter, etc., depending upon what you're working out. Show workings for lengthy calculations, already covered that. Follow instructions, already highlighted that. Use subheadings, as I said, that will align your answer. So make sure that you get your subheadings down and then you flesh it out. The answer should make reference to the information in the scenario. So don't be generic when you've got information available in the scenario. Pick up the information from there and customize your answer. That is an effective answer. Reread the requirement. So once you have, start by reading the requirement, go through the scenario, plan your answer, read the requirement again. Once you've actually written your answer, just quickly go back and read the requirement again, just to make sure that you've not missed out anything, just to make sure that you've not answered what you wanted to answer, but you've really focused on what the examination team wanted to get out of you. Okay? And do not miss the easy marks. So, for example, if you've been given a mark that says, recommend, so discuss this, etc., compare the performance of these 3 products and recommend which product the company should continue making. So a lot of candidates tend to go for the comparison, but they miss out on the easy mark, which is making the recommendation. So don't do that. And that is where, again, rereading the requirement will make sure that you have covered all the aspects. Okay. With that, we're done with the deck of slides that I prepared for you, and what we're on for now is the live Q&A. So I know that you've all been asking questions. So let me just quickly bring up the questions that I have. All right. Okay. So please guide upon how to answer Section C long questions, especially theoretical questions. I've already included some of the pointers there. Use subheadings and, make use of the information from the scenario to explain your point. All right. We have got a question, how much preparation we are supposed to be done with? Well, as of now, given the fact that we are around 21 to 20 days away, it should be at least 80% done, if not 100%. If you've covered 80%, and to be honest, this guideline is I can't actually just say it's a rule of thumb. The reason for that being because every one of us has a different preparation style. So, for example, if your preparation style so far is going through the knowledge aspects and then practicing, making sure that you've covered a sufficient number of practice questions for that particular concept. So definitely you're taking out more time in order to make sure that you've covered all the bases for a particular topic or concept. Then, even if your progress leaves you with, for example, 30% of the syllabus remaining, you're okay. Okay. But if your approach is let's go get through the knowledge first and then we'll practice later, then ideally you should have covered 80 to 90% of the syllabus by now, so that these days that you're left before the exam attempt should be focused on practicing only. Okay. So like I said, there's no general rule of thumb. Ideally, you should have covered more than 50% of the syllabus definitely under either approach, but it really depends upon how well you're preparing. Okay. Important topics for section B and C, everything. Really, everything. Okay. You have to cover every topic concept. All right. If you have scored less than 45% marks in your previous attempt, so those of you sitting for this particular paper, remember that means that there is a challenge with the knowledge. Okay, so there is knowledge and application. So if it's just between 45 to 49 that you've scored, then it's really a matter of application. But if it's less than 45, what we're talking about is a challenge with the knowledge. So you do need to carry out practice, pick up and self-assess and identify which concepts you're not getting right. So it could simply require you to go back and revisit that topic, and then come back and practice additional questions on that. Or, as I said, it could also be a matter of you simply not applying it effectively enough. So what is important is that you take all this feedback that we've shared, and there are, of course, plenty of other guidance videos available. Pick up the pointers from there and just start working on your answering technique. All right, especially for the lengthier questions. But at the same time, making sure that you're practicing the objective type questions daily will help ensure that you do not lose touch with how a concept can be examined in that type of question. And that's crucial because, as I've mentioned at the start of our discussion today, there will be red herrings, there will be misleading information in the scenario, and so you need to be comfortable with that question to sort of say, all right, I know what you're playing at, and arrive at the right answer. Okay, how to tackle performance measurement questions. Really know your knowledge, because again, when we talk about performance measurement, we can be talking about not-for-profit organizations, as we just saw in the March-June 2025 exam sitting. We could be talking about divisional performance, residual income, return on investment, etc. We could be talking about financial performance measures. We could be talking about the balanced scorecard approach. So there's a lot. What is important is that once you have understood the knowledge or the concept with performance measurement, it's all about application. So you need to start picking up past exam paper questions, applying that knowledge to the scenario, making sure that you're presenting your information in an easy to understand format, and that your performance measurement would definitely require that you don't pass generic statements in your answer. So you can't just say, oh, this is generally good, this is generally bad, because the number of times students pass those generic statements and they're so off the mark for the scenario presented, it just baffles the marker, right? So what you need to make sure is that when you're passing a particular statement, you are certain that that particular statement of performance measurement or management applies to the scenario that has been provided. Okay, so for example, again, if you're saying, that the revenue has increased, that could have led to the gross profit margin increase. That's a very generic statement. Are you sure that the revenue has increased? When we look at the financial statements, if it's actually showing that the revenue has gone down, then that clearly can't be your answer. That cannot be your justification for the increase in gross profit margins. This is a very simple example, but I want to, keep a simple example so that majority of the people are able to pick up on what I'm trying to say. So I hope that answers the questions. Okay. Again, don't worry about your discursive answers or your narrative answers being very different from the standard solution. As I said, the standard solution is an ideal solution, right? It's created by a person who's clearly not under any kind of exam pressure or time pressure. And what they're trying to do is, because For the examination team, this standard solution is also a way to communicate or guide you in detail, right? So their answers are always going to be lengthy. They're always going to cover points that you possibly could not have perhaps thought of in that limited amount of time. So remember, the examination team will always prepare an exam that a well-prepared student is able to comfortably complete, and they're able to actually, display their knowledge or their comprehension of that particular syllabus area effectively. So as long as you're making key points, right, you should be able to score the marks. Like I said, what is important is that a lot of candidates come out of the exam hall saying, you know what, we did really well. And they have. But unfortunately, they've answered requirements that they wanted to rather than what the examination team was requiring them to. So, what you need to make sure is once you have planned your answer, read the requirement, make sure that you are answering to the requirement. And if that requirement is an analysis or discussion or explanation, then make sure that you're picking up information from the scenario. And then, as long as they're logical points, you're not rehashing the same thing, you should be safe, right? No worries at all. Okay, remember, you just need to score 50% to pass the paper, pass the exam. Okay. How to prepare theory for section C. Theory is basically analysis, and analysis is something that you will only be able to effectively carry out by application. So the only thing that I can recommend right now is self assign past exam paper questions to yourself and attempt them. And when I say attempt, just don't go through the scenario and read the standard answer. Don't attempt that question as if you were attempting that question in the live exam. All right, and then match your answer to the standard solution to say, all right, am I keep at least responding in the same style, not exactly the same wordings but the same style. Am I using subheadings? Am I applying the information from the scenarios? I do feel I'm repeating myself, but that's basically what you need to do. You can't really just prepare for generic theory because in section C of the exam, it's all about applying that knowledge. And because the scenario will differ from one exam attempt to the next, I can't just say, all right, if you just prepare analysis for not-for-profit organizations, you'll be safe. No, I don't know whether you'll be having not-for-profit organization question or not. Okay, and Martin, do I have time for just a couple of more questions or? Ah,
Yep, one or two more.
perfect. Okay. Um, All right. So that's a good breakup. So one of the candidates has sort of given me a breakdown, and at the end of the day, you do need to score 50% throughout. I would never ever say that if you performed really well in section A or section B, that's fine. You could relax on section C, because as we have seen, section A and section B questions can be tricky. So with especially the multiple choice questions, you've got four options, and believe me, you can work your way to all four possible options. So the fact that they're tricky means that you could attempt them, come out and think, oh, I got that right, and it could be completely off the mark. So you need to make sure that you're attempting all three sections to the best of your capabilities, rather than saying, let's just score, let's just get 10 questions right in this section, 5 questions right in that section, etc. Okay, what order would I suggest going through the exam? To each his own. It really depends upon how you've prepared yourself. I tend to stick to sequential, right? A, B, C. But then I'm very, very particular on the time management aspect. So that's the go for any sequence that you like. Just make sure that if you're starting with section C, 74 minutes, that's the total that you have, 36 minutes per question, and then stick to time for the rest of them as well. But by the time you go into the exam hall, 5 to 10 minutes left at the end of the exam to be able to go back and focus on any questions that you felt you struggled with, just to give it a second look. Okay, and with that, over to you, Martin.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Moniza. I think that's all the time that we had for the session today. The time did run out pretty quick, but thank you for your great insights and being able to deliver everything in such a very direct and easy to understand format. So thank you everyone for attending the session today. And just before we go, I just want to highlight that one of the consistent messaging I have seen across the examiners' reports every time they are released is the need for students to do more question practice and apply their knowledge to the scenario in the question. Yeah, so that has been a consistent comment if you look at all the examiners' reports dating backwards. So one of the ways that we encourage you to do question practice for your exam is to engage with the mocks that we release for every exam sitting. Now, I have a quick poll for you here. Just want to find out how well versed you are with information about the mocks. Do you know the pre-September 2025 mock and debrief dates? Okay, so there are some options that you can click directly on the screen. So please click on the answer that you think is correct. When are the dates for the mock and the debrief release? Thank you for the engagement. I'll give just a couple of seconds. So the screen is interactive. Just click directly on the option A, B, C, or D. And then let's see how well we are. Okay. And here are the results. So most of you have no idea, which is a good place because I will give you the information. 28.7% say 8th and 15th of August, which is correct. So the mocks went live last week on Friday, which was the 8th, and the debrief videos are going live this Friday, which is the 15th. And the reason we space them apart by a week is to encourage you to first engage with the mocks before you view the debrief video, okay? Just as Moniza has said, don't just attempt the questions, lightly. Put in your all, simulate the exam, assume that was an exam question and see how you'd have performed in it. And then once you've done the mock in full, then you can review the marking guide and the sample answer, and then you can watch the debrief video. And it doesn't end there. So once you've watched the debrief video, go back to your mock and see where you can make the improvements. If you can rewrite those answers again with the fresh information, then that would be a perfect way to approach it. Now, just to recap and to bring this to a close, remember the CBE practice platform is available. Lots of past and practice exams there. Do engage with those. Our YouTube channel, the ACCA Study Resources channel, that's where the debrief videos are hosted. That's where the topic explainers are hosted. That's where the recordings of previous webinars are hosted. Lots of video content if you prefer the guidance in that format. And of course, the ACCA Study Hub, your digital textbook containing all the coverage for the syllabus. At this point in time, you should only be going back for your weak areas. This should be your time for practice. Lots of question practice and building up on your exam strategy and exam technique. That's all the time that we had for the session today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you registered for this session, you receive an email tomorrow with a link to access the recording. So please feel free to watch this over again. Again, another reminder, the resources are uploaded. I think we had a bit of a hitch at the start, but we've rectified that. So please do refresh and you should access the resources. And from the rest of us at ACCA, we wish you the best of luck in your preparations and all the success. Thank you so much, and bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Martin, and all the very best to all of you. Best of luck.